Developed by 2K Boston, later renamed Irrational Games, and published by 2K, Bioshock is one of the most discussed, praised, and beloved games of all time, with good reason. It's the second Ken Levine-directed game I've played, and I feel confident in saying that it is his magnum opus. In short, Bioshock needs no introduction. Despite its omnipresence in gaming discussions, its legacy as a masterpiece, and being Exhibit A of games as art, I had managed to avoid most of the spoilers going into it. I suggest you do the same if you haven't played it. Do yourself a favor and play it yourself instead of having it spoiled in this video. I enjoyed the game immensely, and the fact that I didn't know all the twists was a big part of that. It took me about 8.8 hours to finish the game on medium difficulty, but the how long to beat average is 12 hours. In some ways, it feels almost like a game made for me specifically. It's a single-player, narrative-driven FPS with an Art Deco aesthetic, which is very interested in discussing political philosophy. I mean, what more could you ask for in a game? With that in mind, the reviews should hardly be surprising. Bioshock gets a Metacritic score of 96 with a user score of 9.0. So does the game live up to the hype? The story begins on an aeroplane in the year 1960. The player character, Jack, is the only survivor of a plane crash out at sea and manages through incredible luck to find a nearby lighthouse. Turns out that the lighthouse is a front for the entrance to the Art Deco styled objectivist paradise Rapture, a sort of Manhattan under the waves. A recording of Rapture's mythic founder, Andrew Ryan, spells out the ideological foundations for the city. But it quickly becomes apparent that Rapture doesn't exactly live up to its potential at the moment. A man named Atlas contacts Jack over the radio and wants to help Jack escape, on the condition that he in turn helps save Atlas's family. Mechanically, Bioshock works as a standard first-person shooter with some minor twists. There are the famous plasmid powers, which can be used to open up the environment and which can be used in combat. And there's a hacking minigame which can open up safes, make turrets, security cameras, and bots friendly to the player. The player has non-regenerating health, which is restored through the use of first aid kits or through eating food found by looting. It also has a form of mana bar for the plasmids known as Eve. Dying is almost painless as the player is sent back to one of the frequent checkpoints without losing any progress. As I often say, the defining feature of a shooter is its level design and shooting mechanics, as the difference between fighting an enemy with a pistol and an enemy with an AK is much smaller than fighting an enemy in a featureless room versus a room with lots of cover, as opposed to Souls-likes where what enemy you fight defines the fight rather than the arena in which you fight that enemy. Bioshock's level design is okay. It is never really ambitious enough to truly create interesting combat areas for the player to navigate, instead leaning heavily on using a variety of different enemy types and setting up environmental plasmid attack opportunities. That's not to say the levels are bad, rather that they are designed as Metroidvania levels and facsimiles of a cityscape first, and FPS map second. The problem is that many of the enemies are melee only, and even the ones who do shoot seem to prefer getting up close. The standard Bioshock fight is having a small group of enemies try to rush you, and that's how the combat works pretty much throughout the game. It also has a bad habit of spawning enemies behind you, which often makes you fight a new enemy in a room you have already fought the same enemy type in just seconds earlier, which compounds the issue of lacking variety. Speaking of variety, the player has access to a broad arsenal which can be upgraded at special upgrade stations, and every weapon has 3 different types of ammo, which you can switch between freely. Some are just adapted to different types of enemies like the revolver and machine gun, which each gets armor-piercing and anti-personnel rounds. Others have elemental damage like the shotgun's electro ammo and the crossbow's fire quarrels, while others still have trap-laying functions. All in all, the guns are pretty good, except for the fact that they all have bad crosshairs which obscure what you're aiming at, and which makes precision shooting like long-range shots and headshots difficult. This is compounded by the fact that the PC controls are awkward to say the least. The game wants to encourage you switching between pistol and plasmid, so by default binds switching to and from plasmids to right mouse button and puts aiming down sights on Z. Still, the guns feel like they have random spreads and are inaccurate at range, so there is seldom, if ever, a need to aim down sights anyway. The game takes inspiration from survival horror games, and as such, ammo management can become an issue. Luckily, there are vending machines all over Rapture where you can purchase more ammo and sometimes health and Eve hypos. The economy worked pretty well in my playthrough. I almost always wanted or needed to buy something, and I could never afford to buy everything I did want, except right towards the end. But that is just true of the dollar economy. As we'll discuss later, the game's atom economy is a whole nother matter. The basic plot of Bioshock is linear and simple. Jack needs to get out of Rapture and need Atlas's help to do so. As such, most levels are Atlas guiding Jack through Rapture towards what is currently standing in the way of getting to Atlas's family. At first, that is Dr. Steinman, a plastic surgeon who has gone mad in his quest for perfect beauty. Rapture was founded on the idea that great men are too often held back by the parasites of society who want to have a share of a man's hard-earned success without a claim to it, and the petty morality which hinders great men from pursuing art and science at its fullest. Through the discovery of Atom, a substance with which revolutionary genetic modification is possible, Rapture has become the undeniably most technologically advanced society on Earth in 1960, and Atom suffuses all of Rapturian society. But it comes with a dark side. Atom is addictive, and to harvest more, corporations in Rapture have developed the Little Sisters, genetically altered girls whose job it is to harvest Atom from the dead. These Little Sisters can in turn be harvested though, if you're deranged or desperate enough. Therefore, they are given protectors in the form of the Big Daddy, which accompanies each Little Sister. Atom is the lifeblood of Rapture, and plenty of people have done terrible things to get their hands on it. Steinman used it to revolutionize plastic surgery, but found himself more and more dismayed with his inability to create perfection. When the only tool he had available was the scalpel, he could be content with his results. But now that he has the awesome new tool, he finds himself falling short of his potential constantly, always killing the patient in the process. Steinman is the first boss of an area, but he establishes the model for how Bioshock's levels are constructed. We are introduced to a new area and a new obstacle to reaching our goal, and almost always find an individual, a luminary of Rapturian life who has gone mad and who stands in the way of our goal. We kill the lunatic and get to the metro to take us to the next area of Rapture with a voice in the radio patting our back. When we eventually do manage to get to Atlas's family, Ryan kills them and the goal changes. This is now a quest for vengeance. Jack continues his violent tour of Rapture, and we get more and more talking from both Ryan and Atlas. When we finally get to Ryan, we get the twist. If you still haven't played the game, here is where I give you a second chance to experience it for yourself instead of having it spoiled. It turns out that Ryan has rigged Rapture to blow, and that Jack has been controlled by Atlas all along, through the trigger phrase, "Would you kindly?" Ryan's death is probably the best death scene in gaming, a power move and a true showcase of just how committed Ryan is to his ideals. I have more to say about this scene, but that will have to wait until we discuss themes. Jack manages to stop Rapture's self-destruct sequence, but Atlas now considers Jack a loose end which needs tying up. Luckily, Tenenbaum, the scientist who made the Little Sisters, managed to save him and gives him a fighting chance against the mind control. The rest of the game is about completely getting rid of the mind control and pursuing Atlas to kill him for using you, and in the process, Jack even becomes a Big Daddy. The game ends at the top of the tallest tower in Rapture, where Atlas has completed his apotheosis. No longer just a man, he is now what his name always suggested, a Titan, fueled by Atom and hell-bent on killing Jack. The bosses in Bioshock are not great. They are just very spongy versions of normal enemies, and as I've said before, the combat is not the draw with Bioshock. That being said, I think it works to have bosses. I like the way they cap off an area. It would just be more fun if they were more different to the normal enemies. The exception, and I think this is a bit of a contrarian take, is the final boss, Atlas. Atlas looks different, and the fight takes place in a real boss arena complete with faces and trash mobs. It is a bit strange as a conclusion to Bioshock, as the game has hitherto not shown an interest in boss fights as a gameplay convention, but I think it draws it out long enough and makes the boss visually distinct enough to feel climactic. Look at the fight with Atlas here compared to the fight against Sander Cohen, which looks like a capital B, capital F boss fight, and which looks like an annoying bullet sponge. There are also the mini-boss fights against the Big Daddies. While they do look great and have some different moves to regular enemies, they are also always the exact same fight. Bring the grenade launcher and remember to switch to armor-piercing rounds. But other than that, they're just another enemy who charges you, this time with a bigger hitbox and some more powerful attacks. The Big Daddy fights really suffer from the fact that they are not built up to. They just sort of appear, sometimes with little sisters, sometimes on their own. If they don't have a sister with them, don't bother fighting them. If they do, you get to mine up the place before you fire the first shot, as they are neutral by default. There are usually 2 to 4 little sisters in each level, and I think the game would have worked better if there were fewer and more clearly designed Big Daddy fights. You need to fight the Big Daddies to get the little sisters, and you want to save or harvest the little sisters, not just to determine which ending you get, but also to get Adam, and this is where we get to the issues with the economy. Adam is not a precious resource. You will get all the Adam you need and then some, even by just saving the little sisters. There are far more plasmids to buy than you can equip, and most of them are only useful if you actively choose to engage with a side mechanic like hacking or laying traps. The fact that I was able to buy everything I wanted by saving all the little sisters might be a reflection of my preferences as a player rather than a problem with the design. After all, I did go out of my way to find and rescue all the little sisters. But it was hardly a big detour, and the game makes it painfully obvious which is the correct choice to make in the framing of the supposed moral dilemma, as well as with this animation when you do save a sister.
You have shown kindness to my little ones, but are you really?
On top of that, Tenenbaum will send you gifts for saving the little sisters, including Adam, which makes the whole choice a non-issue. If this was supposed to be a difficult choice, it should have forced me to make hard trade-offs about the upgrades I bought with my Adam, but that never materialized. The biggest switch up in the game is towards the end when Jack has to become a Big Daddy himself to get Atlas. This is the worst part of the game, as it gives you a diegetic helmet which obscures your vision and makes you go on a long and annoying escort quest. On the scale of bad escort quests, it's far from that one from Metro 2033 levels bad, but it sure ain't good either, and I get the feeling that it was mainly used to pad the final level. The idea of playing a Big Daddy is very cool, but the game doesn't do anything exciting with it, like going outside in the water or giving you the iconic Big Daddy drill. It also doesn't change Jack's arms, which makes it feel a bit lazy. Furthermore, it's kind of confusing in the context of the good ending, where Jack escapes with the little sisters and raises them as their adopted father, when the irreversible procedure to make Jack a Big Daddy makes him speak in whale sounds and gives him a foul smell. Of course, neither being mute nor smelling bad makes you unable to be a father, but it feels like the whole idea of turning Jack into a Big Daddy was a bit half-baked. Mechanical gripes aside though, Bioshock really is a triumph and deserves its reputation as a classic. At least part of Bioshock's fame is owed to first mover advantage. Gaming is a relatively new form of media, and so there was going to be a first game to discuss political ideology. That ideology in Bioshock is of course objectivism. If the Art Deco style and Atlas imagery didn't give it away, then Andrew Ryan's speeches and propaganda surely does. I mean, the game isn't exactly subtle about it. Andrew Ryan is almost an anagram of Ayn Rand, one of the most famous objectivists whose most famous work, which the game is drawing heavily from, is called Atlas Shrugged. A better, more dedicated reviewer would have read the book in preparation for this discussion, but I'm just not that good. We'll get to the mythological Atlas, the shrug, and who is supposed to be shrugging when later, but to make sense of the objectivism the game comments on, we need to discuss what Atlas Shrugged is all about. Objectivism as a school of thought was developed by Rand, who, according to Wikipedia, described it as the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason his only absolute. It is a very pro-market, individualistic, and highly meritocratic ideology which starts off with the assumption that man is rational and that self-interest is enlightened. Enlightened self-interest is an important concept, And just like for Rand, it is a capstone assumption in Ryan's ideology, without which the whole Rapturian project and the objectivist society collapses. Enlightened self-interest means that the pursuit of one's own goals and ambitions is a moral virtue that tends to lead to optimal societal outcomes. In essence, it is the idea that if everyone pursues their own self-interest without interference from the state or a moral authority like an organized religion, then happiness, progress, and wealth in society becomes a positive-sum game where everyone gets out more than they put in. Objectivism then is also deeply, almost radically, meritocratic. To be a productive member of society in the parlance of Atlas Shrugged, or a man in Ryan's words, is to be someone who, in opposition to Ryan's parasites and Rand's looters and moochers, creates great art, science, or businesses. Unbound by the anchor that is the parasites, the producers are free to make breakthroughs in all fields of human endeavor, but because a person's worth is contingent on their productiveness, and because a producer is not just more creative than a mooch, but also morally superior, objectivist society becomes highly stratified, with an overclass which can do almost no wrong, and an underclass which is essentially ballast. This is exactly what happens in Rapture, where people like Sander Cohen, as a morally superior great man, can pursue violent and obscene art, as he need not be constrained by petty morality. So too can the great scientists of Rapture create monstrosities like the Splicers and the Little Sisters without staining their moral character. The parasites sacrificed were expendable. They never produced anything, let alone anything great. In Atlas Shrugged, American society is being hauled out by an overbearing state which drives the producers to emigrate to a place called Galt's Gulch, where the legendary industrialist and man of the mind, John Galt, is organizing a strike of the producers. The idea is to show the world that the parasites need the producers more than the producers needs the parasites. Without the producers, industry grinds to a halt and the collectivist government collapses while the producers manage just fine in the Gulch. It's easy to see the parallels between Galt's Gulch and Rapture. Both are sanctuaries from the parasites and collectivists, which allow the great a chance to pursue progress and peace. The Atlas thing comes from Greek mythology, just like how almost all the major locations in Raptures draws from the names of the gods of Olympus. Atlas was the titan who was condemned to hold the sky on his shoulders for eternity. But throughout the years, that story morphed into Atlas carrying the world on his shoulders. Rand's men of the mind, then, are modern-day Atlases who carry the modern world on their shoulders, and when they shrug, people's worlds are rocked. Ryan's death, then, is an Atlas shrugging. Ryan built Rapture, and he can destroy it too. His death at Jack's hand is an incredible scene which shows just how committed Ryan is to his objectivist ideals, even after all that's happened since Rapture's founding. A man chooses, and a slave obeys.
A man chooses, a slave obeys.
He chose to destroy Rapture, and you obeyed the command to kill him. How could a parasite like Jack ever hope to live without men like Ryan? Even as he dies, Ryan sees himself as superior to Jack, as it was his choice to die. One of my favorite Ryan speeches is this one.
Imagine the will it took to create a place like this. And what have you built? Nothing. You can only loot and break. You're not a man. You're just a termite at your side.
It shows clearly how Ryan sees himself as superior to a parasite like Jack, and explains why Ryan acts the way he does. Jack in this scene is everything Ryan hates. Someone who blindly follows other people's orders. Someone who doesn't think for themselves. Someone who has never built anything. Someone who has never achieved anything. Better to die as a man than to live as a slave. The second shrug is more conceptual and happens off-screen, but I think it's the more important one ultimately. Atlas the character is named Atlas for the book, and that name is highly deliberate. In my reading of Bioshock, Rapture collapsed way before Jack arrived, and even way before the war between Fontaine and Ryan broke out. Rapture collapsed when Atlas shrugged. All libertarian and anarchist ideologies are built on the idea that people are good at heart. When you arrive in Rapture, Andrew Ryan explains his ideology and expects you to metaphorically sign his social contract. In Rapture, you're expected to pursue your enlightened self-interest. But all societies that eschew a strong central state to enforce its rules and punish those who break them, break down when they encounter bad faith actors. It's ironic that the city under the sea lacks a Leviathan. But without that Leviathan, people like Atlas are free to pursue base self-interest and engage with the rules of the objectivist society in bad faith. What is so beautiful about Atlas is that he is just one man. That is all it took to bring down the world's most technologically advanced society. One man who doesn't follow the rules. When the Atlas twist happened, I initially struggled with it. What was his plan? Why did he do this? What was his ultimate goal? As I went on though, I realized that he had no plan or ultimate goals, and that is what's so great about it. Atlas is a representation of the worst of humanity, someone who hungers for power, lusts for wealth, and has no qualms about lies or violence. He is the other part of humanity, a sort of id to Ryan's superego. Ryan read Rapture's rules to Atlas, and Atlas shrugged in response. Rapture's sinking was inevitable after that. Bioshock's best character is, of course, Andrew Ryan. Armin Shimmerman was perfectly cast and does an amazing job of realizing Ryan. As much as he is a villain, I can't help but see him as an ultimately tragic figure. Someone who, in some ways, really did embody his own ideals of man as a heroic figure capable of shaping the world through sheer will alone. Yet his paradise was always doomed. When the game began, I found myself a bit annoyed with the Sturgeon Steinman. The time between introduction of the genius surgeon to his boss fight is extremely quick, and the revelation that he went mad in search of perfect beauty, ultimately killing his patient in the process, felt rote and predictable. But in the grand scheme of things, Steinman is a great intro to Rapture as a parallel to Ryan. Both have a beautiful vision that can never be realized, and the pursuit of which always causes great harm. As hateable and detestable as Ryan can be, he remains sympathetic due to his dedication to his ideals. He lived his life mostly according to his stated ideology, and even died a violent and painful death for his values, using them as a cudgel against Jack, even while Jack was using the golf club like a literal cudgel against Ryan. The second best character in Bioshock is, of course, Atlas, again perfectly cast, voiced by Karl Hanover. I usually try to stay away from development history when doing my discussions, partly because there are others who are much better at it, and partly out of a sort of intellectual preference. To me, the files on my SSD always take precedence over developer intent when trying to understand a game. I practice a sort of death of the game studio, if you will. Still, I have to give credit to Ken Levine for his decision not to tell Hanover that Atlas's catchphrase, "Would you kindly," had special meaning. It took a lot of restraint to hide that detail, and the game is much better for it. Atlas is a great villain, and he really shines when contrasted with Ryan. Of course the id would fight the superego, and in straits as dire as they are in Rapture, is it really surprising that the id won? My third favorite character is not Tenenbaum, Cohen, or Jack. It is Rapture itself. Rapture is stunningly beautiful in its design, and the concept is so fascinating as to inspire a yearning to visit it in real life, were it a possibility. One of my favorite things about Rapture is the way the game always refuses the player vistas. There are no instances except for the descent from the lighthouse when the game tries to awe the player with Rapture's splendor. For the rest of the game, the player catches breathtaking glimpses through windows in lifeless, rotting, slowly flooding environments. Seeing the city in the depths can be entrancing, and you really understand why people would want to go there. Rapture is alluring because of its impossibility, and it's perfectly fitting that that aspect of the city is represented visually. Finally, let's discuss Jack. As I've alluded to, I see Jack as a sort of representation of the ego. Trapped between Ryan and Atlas, he forges his own path through much hardship. In one of Ryan's most memorable audio logs, he talks about a forest he owned on the surface, perfectly foreshadowing his attempt to destroy Rapture. God couldn't make a city under the sea, but he could. I also love this audio log where he explains why he wanted to build Rapture under the sea.
To build a city at the bottom of the sea in sand. But where else could we be free from the clutching hand of the parasites?
Where else could we build an economy that they would not try to control, a society that they would not try to destroy? It was not impossible to build Rapture at the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to build it anywhere else.
Ryan had an incredibly strong force of will to have managed to make all of this. For a few short but glorious years, he really did build a utopia without gods or kings, only men. But his insistence on promoting great industrialists, great artists, and great men meant that there was no room for great pals, great partners, or great parents in Rapture. Despite being his son, Ryan is never affectionate towards Jack. Indeed, Atlas has far more of a familial relationship to Jack than Ryan does. That coldness between father and son is what makes the family ending so beautiful. If Jack rescued all the little sisters, he gets them to the surface and raises them as his daughters, ultimately proving both Ryan and Atlas wrong. Jack could do more than destroy, and could care for more than himself. Atlas could amass untold wealth and power, and Jack still defeated him because he had something Atlas could never get: friends. Ryan can build a literal city under the waves, and Jack still managed to build something he never could: a family.